wanted in the OR. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR.
Welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast with your host, Dr. Randy Cook.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Prescription for Success. I'm Dr. Randy Cook, your host for this podcast, which is produced with support from MD Coaches, a company dedicated to developing and empowering physicians to realize a greater potential and achieve a greater level of satisfaction in their chosen roles. You can find out more about MD Coaches at mymdcoaches.com. Today, it'll be my pleasure to be talking with Dr. Duncan B. McRae, Jr. Dr. McRae has had a very successful career of just over 3 decades as a general surgeon in Montgomery, Alabama. About 5 years ago, he was persuaded to take on a new role as Director of the Surgical Clerkship for the University of Alabama Birmingham School of Medicine, Montgomery Regional Campus. And today, although he has handed off the responsibility of surgical instruction, he continues to serve as advisor and mentor to the UAB School of Medicine students assigned to the Montgomery campus. Dr. McRae received his MD degree from Vanderbilt University School of Medicine and went on to complete his surgery training at the University of Virginia School of Medicine in Charlottesville in 1981. Following that, he relocated to Montgomery, Alabama with his family and began a practice in general surgery. He eventually narrowed his focus to concentrate primarily on breast and endocrine disease. So thank you again for joining us today, and now let's listen to my interview with Dr. Duncan B. McRae, Jr. So, Dr. Duncan McRae, thank you very much for joining us today, and welcome to Prescription for Success.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cook. I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, again, we're grateful to have you, and Dr. McRae, you and I have known each other for quite a while, and I'm going to use that opportunity to suggest that we dispense with the formalities, and I'll call you Duncan, and you can call me Randy, and it'll sound much more like the conversations that we have from day to day when we run into each other in Montgomery. Is that okay with you?
That is perfectly fine with me, Randy. Thank you.
Well, all right, let's begin with your beginnings, if you don't mind, Duncan. I think it's very interesting that you grew up in the community of McRae, Georgia, and I have no doubt that you must have some family connection with the beginnings of McRae. What can you tell us about that?
Well, the only time that the name McRae has any significance is when I describe the name of my town outside of the city limits of McRae. If you go to McRae, Georgia, you'll realize that there are lots of families of McRae, and the only reason that the name McRae stuck to the town was because just after the Civil War, the railroads intersected in Telfair County, and hotels and stores grew up around that intersection, and it happened to be on the property owned by a gentleman whose last name was McRae. And hence, even though it is sometimes humorous to mention that I come from McRae, it has no economic significance, if you know what I mean.
I see. Well, I know there is one particular significant citizen of McRae, and that would be your father, who was a physician and, in fact, a surgeon, I believe. Is that correct?
That is correct. He trained himself he had training in family medicine as well as in general surgery, because he knew that both skills of internal medicine, pediatrics, and surgery would be very important in that small town. And he had a very successful career and helped a lot of people he was very fortunate to be surrounded by quality individuals, other physicians, well-trained in that small town. And it makes me very proud to say that in that city of McRae in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, they had a very high quality of medical care throughout that time. Growing up in McRae was a lot of fun. It was, my sisters suggest that we grew up in Mayberry, as did Andy Griffith, but I'm not really sure about that. It depends on which side of the tracks you grew up on, I suspect, in retrospect. But I really enjoyed growing up watching my father practice medicine. He was my impetus to pursue it. But perhaps I'm getting ahead of myself, Randy. You may have other questions before I
actually, I really did want to get into that, and I also wanted to affirm something that you said earlier about the quality of medical practice in McRae. I think that there is an attitude, and you may agree or disagree with this, but sometimes the attitude in the medical universities, the ivory towers, as we like to say it, they tend to sort of look down on small town medicine. But I actually did my surgery training, as you are probably aware, at Medical College of Georgia in Augusta, and I actually received patients in referral from your dad from time to time, and I can certainly attest to the fact that my experience was that the quality of medicine practiced in McRae was as good as it is anywhere, and I really enjoyed interacting with your dad. But let's get back to that influence. Did you decide very early in life that you wanted to follow in his footsteps and go to medical school?
Randy, it was never a concerted decision that I made. I simply followed him around throughout my childhood. He worked 7 days a week. He never complained of his workload. It was just his lot in life. I went to his office often, just in the morning, sometimes in the summertime when I didn't have school, I would go down there at 10 o'clock and we would have around 10, I should say, and we would have a Coke and sit down in his office, and he would ask me how things were going in my life. That is, when I was, what does an 8th grade boy tell his father is going on in his life? I don't know. But I watched him, and sometimes, especially in the weekends, he made house calls, and I went with him in the car. I often sat waiting on him, thinking about what he was doing, and I watched him interact with his patients. And people would ask me all the time, particularly on these house calls when I would occasionally interact with the patients' families, they would ask me if I was going to pursue medicine like my father. And the only proper response, it seemed to me, was, yes, I am. And as a result, from early on, I had this single direction. Even when I was in high school, I felt like that was the way I should follow. And I never stopped thinking like that. I often wonder, what in the world would I have done had I changed courses or not been accepted in medical school? There was really no plan B for me. I was fortunate that things seemed to work out.
And I'm going to guess that was a really substantial component of your medical education those early years, although you may not necessarily have learned a great deal about the science of medicine at that time. I would imagine that you learned a great deal of what I like to refer to as the priesthood of medicine. Would you agree?
I would agree with that, Randy. My father was not necessarily a warm and fuzzy person, but he was a guy who insisted on fairness to everyone. And in watching him deal with everyone, he lived up to that creed. He was very consistent, and he took care of all comers. And he did not tolerate even consideration of doing less than At least that was the impression that I had. I'm doing less than what he should have been doing. And in the hospital in that small town, we had wonderful people working too. Everybody was working hard to make sure people were treated properly. And they were also, my pursuit of medicine was reinforced by so many of the nurses there. I remember one wonderful woman who worked in the operating room asked if I'd ever given a shot, if I knew how to give a shot, and she rendered herself the guinea pig for me to give my first injection of saline into her left
I can say
bicep. She was a brave woman. I can't imagine doing that or seeing other people do that. So that's kind of how I got my direction, and it continued. My father, he seemed to be proud of the fact that he never insisted or pushed me in the direction of medicine. He never did in word, but I think that was in his subconsciousness all the time. That's what I think.
Well, that was certainly a testament to his capability as a father, that he was able to show you the way, but not necessarily push you one way or the other. And that really is quite a testament to the wisdom of your dad. So, Duncan, at some point, you made a decision to continue your initial education outside the city limits of McRae, and I believe that took place at Darlington Academy in Rome, Georgia. Tell us a little bit about how you came to that decision and what sort of an impact that had on your life.
Well, to be perfectly honest and transparent, Randy, the decision was not mine. It was my parents. That was when I was 14 years old, going into the 10th grade. And my parents felt that I could not achieve the educational quality that they felt I needed in McRae. And so they elected to send me to Darlington School in Rome, Georgia. I was there through my 10th, 11th, and 12th grades, and I met a number of people there that have had far-reaching influences on my life, one of whom was Bob Harbin, a classmate of mine, who is now an ophthalmologist in Rome, Georgia. But he and I were able to go to the University of Virginia together once we finished Darlington. And we remained friends through the University of Virginia, but as time goes by, we all kind of lose touch with some of even our closest friends. And as we gain new ones in new places, Bob and I didn't see a whole lot of one another throughout the University of Virginia, although we did touch base periodically, and we kept careful track of each other's quest for medical school. Bob was pushed by his father to some degree to finish college, his undergraduate school, as quickly as possible. And he was able to go to Vanderbilt University Medical School after 3 years of college. And he enjoyed it very much. He met lots of interesting people, and he and I continued to communicate. And as I was very interested in his experience at Vanderbilt, as I was trying to determine what medical schools to apply to, he and I talked frequently, and I visited with him. And it was really Dr. Harbin who influenced me to go to Vanderbilt. And I was fortunate enough once to have applied, to have been admitted. And there at Vanderbilt in Nashville, I met my wife, Jeannie, and we had a wonderful 4 years in Nashville, meeting some wonderful people. Medical school was a different experience, intense, very personal. We made some very close friends in our class of 75. We withstood the slings and arrows of medical school life together. And several of us have remained close since then. Only a few of us, however, went into surgery.
Well, that was going to be my next question. And you mentioned that your dad had a fairly busy surgical practice back in McRae, but at the time that you started medical school, were you fairly well decided at that point that it was going to be surgery, or did that take some time along the way?
Randy, I always enjoyed the operating room. I say I always enjoyed it because I had the unusual opportunity, even when I was in college, to help out in the operating room with my father. I'm not sure that opportunity would be available to many people today in view of the environment that we live in, but I was able to be his first assistant. I watched him. I listened to him. I was intrigued with the way he used his hands. I always enjoyed using my hands. I built model airplanes as a child. I enjoyed making things, and I was attracted to the hands-on approach, literally, of surgery. And I also liked the idea of having a target to aim for that most surgeons have as they direct their energies toward a problem, as in appendicitis or colon cancer or something like that. That always appealed to me.
And were there any I hate to interrupt you, but I'm very interested to know, were there any particular surgeons that you came in contact during your medical school years that were particularly influential in your decision?
As a medical student, as you will recall, we were at the bottom rung of the totem pole. And all of the surgeons that I met, I was totally intimidated by them all. And whether they wanted it to be this way or not, I felt that they were completely unapproachable. Some of my medical student friends didn't feel that way and were a little more aggressive in their push for it. But nevertheless, I really didn't get to know any of the surgeons well. My contact with the chief residents was even more hair-raising. So those people really didn't influence me a great deal. But the ones that did influence me were the second and third year residents who were just above me, some of whom had great humility and great capacity to help. They had wonderful hands. They were solid as a rock in the face of difficult and trying times. And those people were, I can't even remember their names, but I watched them and I was so impressed with what they could do and how they helped patients. And so that pushed me. I knew that I wanted to do some kind of surgery. And I didn't pursue any of the medical fields, the medical specialties, because I wanted to be involved in what I thought was the center of action, and that was the operating room.
And I want to ask you one other thing, if you don't mind the interruption. I can identify with exactly your description of what it was like to deal with the surgical faculty when you're a medical student. It was not particularly encouraging. In fact, I guess I shouldn't name him, but I will tell you a little story of my own. My very first day on my surgical rotation as a junior medical student, the vice chairman of the department came in to orient us, and he came in and said, I want you all to understand that we are aware that on your medical rotations and your pediatric rotations that you have been an integral part of the team and have been very involved in the direct care of your patients. But what I want you to understand is that on the surgery service, you will be in the way. Those were his exact words. And now, fortunately, they were not all like that. There was one gentleman in particular that was very thoughtful and very encouraging to the medical students. But I did experience that same sort of distance from the surgery faculty. Got lots of encouragement from the residents, as you have mentioned, but I think it really is interesting that that surgeon persona is something that a lot of people continue to believe that it's just the mark of a surgeon. But that said, my experience with you is that you're nothing like that. And I'm wondering if that was a conscious decision on your part, or is it just the way you are? What do you think makes the difference? Why were you not like the chairman of surgery at Vanderbilt?
You know, Randy, I think all of that is a function of our own personalities. There's no question, I think, that we all remember the people who were tyrannical, loud, perhaps profane, but there are other surgeons who are different than that. I think that I didn't make any conscious decision to be the way I am. I think most people don't make such decisions. There are moments where I have violated all the rules, though. But, I watched, and, we go back to my father a good bit, but I watched him as he saw his patients. And I never really saw him raise his voice or become angry. I saw him the way he was with his colleagues. I must tell you, as you can perceive, he was kind of almost superhuman in that way, in my perception, particularly through the eyes of a 10-year-old boy. And I probably haven't changed too much since then. I remember after his death, he died 20 years ago, but after his death, I met with a gentleman who was 5 years his junior, who had trained with my father and was one of his greatest friends. My father was involved in World War II. He was a battalion surgeon. And when he came back from overseas, he practiced in McRae immediately after his return for about 3 years. He practiced as a small town family physician, but he realized that was not enough. And so he went back to do his surgical residency in Jacksonville, Florida, where I was born. And it was during that time that he met this good friend. And this good friend described to me that whenever there was a significant problem, they always would call my father because he'd been in the war. He'd seen everything. And apparently he had generated that kind of aura. Whether it was accurate or not, I have no idea. But that aura continued even in McRae and as I was growing up. And I told Dr. Dunsford, this gentleman who was my father's friend, that aura still continued in many people's eyes, including his own partners that he'd been with. I think I've rambled. I'm not sure where. Oh, you asked me exactly how I came to be the way I am, and the answer is I don't know. Probably a combination of many, many circumstances, including my father's profound influence, as well as my own DNA, and everybody I've met for the past 50 years has influenced me as well.
I bet your dad had a lot to do with it, and at the having taken the risk of insulting every surgeon who might listen to our program, I will also say that although I found as a medical student the surgical faculty at University of Alabama to be distant, I never ever saw one of them be unkind to a patient.
Yeah. I wish that I could say the same for the people that I've seen in my career.
Well, that was University of Alabama, and of course we have all seen some physicians and surgeons behave badly, but I just didn't want to give anybody the impression that I think surgeons are a great big group of bad guys, because certainly they are not.
You're absolutely right. But surgeons do have that sense of, or at least they have the reputation of arrogance and absence of humility. At least that is the impression that they give. I'm not certain. That may be, in some cases, a misconception.
Yeah, I think we could probably all agree that there is a personality type that is more capable to make decisions and move ahead rather than to deliberate, and that in turn brings with it some other personality traits. So
that's right.
Enough of the psychology. I want to get back to you and your career. So you finished your surgery residency back in Virginia, in Charlottesville. At the end of your residency, made the decision to settle in Montgomery, Alabama, which you have not mentioned so far in this conversation. So I'm wondering how you identified Montgomery as a place to make your home.
Well, Randy, it was the sweet combination of, one, job opportunity, and two, the fact that Montgomery lies essentially, not quite, but almost equidistant from my wife's home of New Orleans and my home in McRae, Georgia. Our parents were both aging, and we wanted to be within striking distance of either city, and that has worked out.
So at least to a certain degree, it was a practical decision.
It was. We knew we wanted to be back in the South, where we are most comfortable, the two of us. And this wonderful opportunity arose, and I am very grateful for that. I think it has worked out. Who knows what would have happened had I tried to go elsewhere, but I can't think about those conjectural things. What we've had here has been very fulfilling. So I have no complaints about that.
I can certainly say that I have never met anybody in Montgomery who knows you who is not grateful that you're here. And that is a testament to your capability, not only as a surgeon, but as a human being.
Thank you.
So you had a very successful surgical practice. I think I might have mentioned earlier that although general surgery was your board certification toward the end of the career, you decided to narrow the niche to concentrate more on breast disease and endocrine surgery. How did that happen to come about?
That's a hard question to answer, Randy. One of the things that I've thought about over the past many years was how or why does anyone's career evolve in the direction that it does. Sometimes I think people can certainly make conscious decisions, but sometimes it just happens. In the late 1980s and 90s, there came a tremendous surge in breast cancer research, and the incidence of breast cancer was increasing, and a number of meetings that I went to put a great emphasis on breast cancer. And I saw that some people in Montgomery who were practicing breast cancer surgery, taking care of people, were not really keeping up. And I felt that it would be a worthwhile venture to make to apply myself in those areas, in the area of breast cancer. And I found that I enjoyed interacting with these women. I enjoyed helping them a great deal. The literature of it was intellectually stimulating. The surgery was not terribly, I hate to say something like that. Sometimes it could be very taxing, but most of the time it was not. And it didn't render the patient terribly ill afterward. And for whatever reason, my practice seemed to pick up along those lines. And suddenly I found myself seeing more breast patients than I did anyone else. About the same time, well, I would say around the turn of the century, 2000, 2001, I saw several people with thyroid problems. And I also happened to go to a wonderful meeting in Boston about thyroid and parathyroid surgery, and it was very interesting and exciting. And I didn't see a whole lot being done in Montgomery, and I didn't go out and pound the pavement asking for thyroid patients, but for whatever reason, they just, I started seeing more and more of these people. And again, same type of thing. It's exciting to learn new techniques and to help these people out. And so within 5 to 6 years, I found myself doing majority thyroid, parathyroid, and breast surgery. Although I still continued with bread and butter general surgery. So it's difficult to kind of pinpoint exactly why, how, or when. But by the time I stepped back from the operating table, most of my surgery was endocrine and breast. Endocrine being thyroid, parathyroid. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes it's just a matter of being in the right place at the right time. Would you agree?
I would. And this, I think we would all agree that the past 30 years have seen enormous advances in the treatment of breast cancer patients from all aspects. And that's been a lot of fun.
I can't think of anything that has changed quite as much in my surgical career, which matches yours year for year, as the advances in breast cancer. And
yeah.
I agree. It is really a good thing for humans as a group, how we have been able to make such progress in that regard. So, well, one of the things that we like to talk a lot about on the show, and one of our real reasons for being here, is to talk about how aspiring physicians find their way. And I know that some 5 or 6 years ago, you became more closely involved with the medical students in Montgomery. So tell us about how that came about and what it's meant to you.
It was serendipity to some degree. The evolution of my practice was such that, by evolution, I mean there were tremendous changes in my practice. We became employees of Baptist Medical Center. We developed a trauma team, and it became apparent that for those reasons and others that it was time for me to step back. And at about the same time, Dr. Wick Manny approached me regarding the possibility of becoming involved with the regional campus of UAB. UAB, of course, had 3 campuses, Tuscaloosa, Huntsville, and Birmingham, and they were going to add a 4th. And so Wick invited me to help develop the surgical clerkship. We were going to only accept 3rd and 4th year students. All the medical students in each class did their first 2 years at UAB in Birmingham, but everyone was parceled out to the various regional campuses, hopefully more or less according to the students' wishes. And we started that 3rd year, and the 3rd year, as you know, it is a panoply of medicine, in that the students rotate through several rotations, demonstrating hopefully the whole gamut of medicine. And I helped start the surgical rotation, and at that same time, I kind of backed off of surgery and began this clerkship, which was a lot of fun, trying to recruit physicians to participate in medical student instruction. And it's been a very interesting journey over the past 5 years.
I'll bet it has. And tell me, what has been your overall impression of the medical student of the 21st century as compared to what it was like when you were at that stage?
Well, Randy, that is a complex question filled with possibility. Let me see if I can try to answer that. First of all, at my age, I'm between 65 and 70. It was very interesting to come face to face with 25-year-olds for the most part, and to see their enthusiasm, their anxiety about being placed in a position of patient encounters and the responsibilities that it may involve. These students are anxious to learn. They are anxious to feel like they belong, and anxious to get beyond the days of the classroom and get into real life. Having said that, there's no question there have been cultural changes over the past 50 years since you and I were medical students. And these young people have varying monikers. Right now, they're called millennials, and there are certain attitudes that are attached to them. And I try not to stereotype these young people. There are a lot more, but one of the glaring differences is that there are a lot more women involved. Half of the medical school classes, at least, are female. And
that's a big difference. There were a total, I think, of about a dozen women in my class of 125. And it's at least 50-50 now.
It is. And I think that is as it probably should be.
Absolutely.
The women are just as intent as the men, and they are, as they always have been, they seem to be more interested and more anxious to learn, and probably do better on all the quizzes than the men. I can only remember when I was in high school having this terrible contest with 3 girls in my class, and they always seemed to do better than I, despite my every effort. Anyway, so the medical school classes are I've been raised, born and bred in a surgical environment, if you will, and sometimes the surgical environment is not a happy place, not as happy a place as it could be for some young people, and that makes for interesting ministering.
This is sort of an off-the-wall question, and you're welcome to tell me that it doesn't make sense and you don't want to talk about it, but do you think you learned anything from the students?
Oh, my goodness. Absolutely. It's very important. They can spot a fraud a mile away. They are much better versed in the biochemistry and the genetics of everything that we talk about. What they lack is practical experience. And so I look upon my job as that to talk about the practical aspects of medicine. They can talk to me all day about the biochemistry of renal function, but what they don't know about is how to treat somebody who has low urine output, low blood pressure, what fluids, how fast, things like that. So, that is eye-opening to them. They are they soak it up like sponges, and they're anxious to learn everything they can about that.
I think they have made me smarter in many ways, but it really is very much a consensual relationship, I think. And as you say, the things that they have to offer are a lesson in just how life is changing, in addition to their familiarity with the newer versions of the science, which have been a real benefit to me, and to be able to be mutually beneficial to one another, to me, has been very satisfying in those instances when I've been able to work with medical students. And it sounds like you've had somewhat the same experience.
I have, and I am quick. I have learned that it's important to be quick to let them know what you don't know. When they ask me, no question about that. And they have I find in general that, if it's possible to be general, I find that they are not disrespectful at all in sharing their information with me, and I try to be quick to admit what I do not know. So I've had a very good experience with the students. It does keep you in contact with different generations, and I think that's healthy for me anyway. I hope for them as well. We'll see.
Duncan, we hear a lot about physician burnout nowadays. Do the students that you're coming into contact with, do they ever even discuss that, or would you say they're too excited to even have any idea what the pressure is going to be like in practice?
Randy, I am reluctant to talk to them about the concept of burnout. They are enthusiastic right now. I have read about medical student burnout, and to me that is tragic. Here you have somebody who's just embarking on a career and already exhausted from the pressures that have been placed upon them. I must say that this third year, these students are tested right and left. After every rotation, the third year, they have a big exam. They have parts 1, 2, and 3 of this national examination that they take, and they must pass in order to progress in medical school. There is enormous pressure on them. Thus far, in my experience, with the admittedly, out of a class of 200, we have only 20 in Montgomery. That's 20 each year. So I've only had a limited experience, but so far, almost everyone maintains that degree of enthusiasm that you would hope for. And they're all so excited about match day and graduation. So I am pleased to say that my experience in medical school burnout is minimal.
Well, that's good. It's nice to know that these kids are, well, I call them kids, these young adults are at least having an opportunity to understand how exciting the practice of medicine can be. And hopefully we can make some improvements in the pressures of private practice that will allow them to be as rewarded in their practice as you have. Certainly hope so.
And you, I hope so too.
Well, Duncan, I've really enjoyed chatting with you about your journey over the past 4 decades or so. You have certainly been a real pillar of the medical community in Montgomery, Alabama in the years that you've been here, and I get the feeling that it's been a rewarding journey for you as well. But right now, what I'd like to do is move on to the featured part of our show, and that's where we ask our guest to share some personal thoughts of their own. So I'm just going to close my mic, and we'll all listen while you give us your personal prescription for success.
Well, Randy, this concept of success, I'm sure it means something different for each one of us. I must say that my idea of success is a sense of accomplishment and my purpose. And I'd like to think that my purpose is to help and heal as many people as I can in my career. Other people may consider success economic success, but I want to focus. I think I have focused primarily on the patient. Now, again, there is a second side of that success. That is that purpose. That second side is maintaining a balance with your family. I don't see how one can be successful in one without maintaining this balance between family and medicine. People have written reams on that. Everyone has to establish that balance at some. They have means that position of balance is a different place for everyone. Could I have done it better? Probably. My greatest asset in achieving that balance is having a wife that really understood the direction that I was headed, and she supported me. And I don't know how in the world I could have done that. I don't see where my life would have gone without her balancing things for me at home. She never complained about my absences. I complained bitterly. When I got to Montgomery, I really didn't know what I was going to expect. I didn't know what my purpose was, in fact. I simply knew that I hoped that I had acquired these certain surgical skills. What I was going to do with them, I wasn't sure. How I was going to interact with patients, I wasn't sure. The things that I have thought about over the years that I believe worked for me, and all of these things are aspirational. I've made every mistake in the world in surgery and personally, and I do not mean to suggest that I have the right formula for anybody, but there's some things that I think are very important that allow a physician to consider himself or herself successful, and that is, I think, the number one thing as a physician. You must keep the patient. And forgive me for preaching. I don't want to do that. But these are the things that are really important to me, and that is to keep the patient as the top priority. I am really concerned about the forces that act on medicine right now. I don't pretend to have a crystal ball in front of me to understand where medicine is going, but there are forces that I recognize that are acting on medicine to distract the physician from that top priority. Those forces being, of course, the people who pay physicians, who are insisting on greater efficiency, greater speed, see more patients, perhaps not even see the patients. I know some physicians who are considered no-touch doctors. I can't help but believe that is misguided. Perhaps I sound like a 19th century physician, but I believe that if the goal is to heal, then you have to be by the bedside of the patient, and you have to examine the patient. Another thing I have thought about that I believe is part of the secret of anyone's success is, I think one must surround himself with excellence. By that I mean, go to partners who are better than you. Go to partners who make you a better surgeon or a better physician. Choose partners who exemplify your ideals of caring for patients, ideals of learning. I know all that sounds fairly straightforward, but it's not. But it's important, I think, to keep that in mind. Don't sell yourself short. You need to need to surround yourself with excellence. The other thing that Randy, that I think is important, and I won't say anything else, but we could talk all day about these things, of course. Be humble. They're always, particularly as a surgeon, you are impacting a person's life physically. It is important to recognize your own limitations and always to try to, I think it's important to ask advice when you need it. I think that the physician, in particular the surgeon, in the midst of that humility must be courageous. Be bold, but not foolish. The wringing of hands is a problem. It's okay to wring your hands for a moment and come to a decision, but when you recognize a direction to follow, pursue it. I'll stop there, Randy. I would invite you to comment and ask me other questions.
Well, I think that's a really good prescription, Duncan. What I've taken away from that is, first of all, keep your focus on the patient. Secondly, make sure that you never, ever neglect your family and know that they are an important part of what keeps you upright. So you got to have a strong support system. Learn from your mistakes, but don't suffer from your mistakes. Make sure that you learn and become wiser because of those things. Be an influencer. I think that's something that we don't talk about enough, and that is how our profession has been overtaken by the merchants and the money changers, as I like to call them, and perhaps at the top of the list, we should always remember that we're always learning, and it's important to identify mentors of your own. So I thank you for those thoughts, and I thank you for being here to share them with us. It's been a pleasure to talk to you again, and thank you for being here.
It's been my pleasure, Randy. My pleasure. Thank you.
Duncan, we like to give people a chance to be able to get in touch with you if you like. We never know who might be interested in learning more about you or reconnecting with you or whatever. So if you'd like to share an email address or a website, would you like to do so?
Sure, I'll be happy to. My email address is duncmc1249@charter.net. I'll be happy to entertain anyone's thoughts or questions if they would like to email me. I'm not sure that that email address came through well because the D's, N's, and M's sometimes are hard to hear over the telephone. It can be confusing.
Well, it does say Dunk Mac, and we'll be sure and put that on our website so people can catch up with it there.
Okay.
And that brings another successful Prescription for Success podcast to a close. I'd like to thank MD Coaches for sponsoring this podcast. You can learn more about MD Coaches by visiting their website, mymdcoaches.com. That's mymdcoaches.com. You can also subscribe to our show and glean more insight about my guests by reviewing the show notes on our website, rxforsuccesspodcast.com. That's rxforsuccesspodcast.com. Do please leave us a comment or a question, and I'll read those on the air from time to time. And finally, if you'd like to help support the show and gain access to members-only content, you can become a patron at patreon.com/rxforsuccesspodcast. That's patreon.com/RX for Success podcast. Thank you again for listening, and do join me again next time for another Prescription for Success.